Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we're following Allie K. Dakers, teacher, actor, director, and producer, as she shapes the development of her innovative middle school drama club and guides her students' idiosyncratic creative journeys. Today, we'll be focusing on the October 31st Middle School Drama Club meeting. Now, as we all know, October 31st is Halloween, so we weren't quite sure how many kids would be able to attend, but Allie took an unofficial survey in the days leading up to the 31st and found out a good number of kids would still be able to attend. And in fact, 14 kids were able to make it. And I know, Allie, you told me you did reassure those who had Halloween plans and were unable to make it that the emotion commotion scenes that they had worked on the prior week would be presented the week after Halloween, so no one had to worry about missing this particular meeting. So they got right into it, and 2 kids led the warm-up, and I know, Allie, you felt that they did well, and I think the kids are getting used to being called on to lead these activities, and not necessarily those who are raising their hands to volunteer. And as we noted last week, Allie's really giving the club members the opportunity to take a leadership role right from the very beginning of the season. And we've also been discussing the implications for Allie and the program of having a large number of students in the club this year. And I know Allie's been thinking a lot about how to maintain the integrity of the program while keeping everyone engaged as much as possible. So Allie, for this Halloween special day, I know you came up with a new game that does address this issue and managed to facilitate team building all while the kids had a great time. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I sort of spun a game off something that already exists. It's like a full group rock paper scissor, and it's been utilized in a lot of different realms. So I sort of I tweaked it to be more Halloween-y. So we called it Goblins, Ghouls, and Ghosts, and the kids have to create physicalities to sort of represent those different characters. They face head to head in a line, and there's like a whole one trumps the other one, and they chase and bring them back to their team. So the kids are constantly switching teams and tagging each other and swapping sides and coming up with game plans and enacting them and then seeing what happens, how that all plays out. So it's a lot of fun. I could get all the kids involved at once, and of course it's Halloween, so they just want to run and play, which is what we
exactly.
want. But really what it did allow the kids to kind of deal with constantly shifting loyalties, which kept the group dynamic sort of fluid and open with each other. And at the same time, they're all working towards the same goal. So even when they swap sides, they know exactly what their intention is and what they're going to do and what are they going to do to kind of achieve that goal. So it was fun.
It's interesting. This game, as I listened to you describe it, sounds like pure unadulterated fun. Almost at any age, the opportunity to just keep running and being, just letting it rip. Mm-hmm. But even with a game like this, there's still a purpose, and there are still things that they're getting out of it, even if they don't necessarily know it consciously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So very interesting. And next up was a game called Freeze, which is usually a 2-person improv game. Mm-hmm. Now, Allie intended to modify this game to attempt to involve as many kids as possible. And first, she decided to explain this to the club members, and in doing so really brought them into the process by very candidly outlining her challenge and saying, guys, we've got a really big group this year, and I know you all want to be as engaged as possible and moving as much as possible. So I'm going to be trying a number of different things, and I would really like it for you to give me some feedback as to how these different approaches may be working for you. So, Allie, first, it seems to me that this enabled you to model the importance of transparency with regard to group issues, which I think is important in virtually any setting. And second, you really imply that a challenge of any type, be it for one person, several people, no matter what the nature of it, is really a challenge for the whole group and affects everyone. So you enlisted the kids, therefore, in problem solving, which hopefully they come to understand, I imagine, is something that benefits the entire group.
Yeah, it's important that the kids feel they're a part of it, and the feedback aspect is important to me, for sure, because I want to shape something driven by what they hope to experience. So,
exactly. And here's how the freeze game usually works before Allie's modification. She generally selects 2 veteran students who have scene creation experience. And to initiate a scene, one person starts talking about something. The other person listens and follows the first person's lead and takes the story in a certain direction, whatever comes up for him or her. Then, when Allie sees one of the 2 kids in an interesting physical position, she'll yell, "Freeze!" Whereupon that student literally freezes in position.
Both of them do,
Oh, both of them freeze. Okay. She then selects a student who is watching to switch with one of the 2 frozen students. And the new student has to assume the position of the person that he or she replaced. However, at this point, that student begins a new improv section. So while the physical position literally remains the same, the context changes. So, given the fact that this is the usual setup, Allie, how did you decide to modify it to bring more kids in, involve more kids from the beginning?
Instead of starting with 2, I started with 3. And then as we called freeze, I replaced all 3 kids at once. And again, I was experimenting with things to see sort of what's going to work, what's not going to work. And it was great because I was able to get more kids involved. But the problem is that, as you discussed, when you typically have the 2 people, one is replaced, another one comes in and starts something new. So that the other person that was initially in the scene, has to then adapt and flow with the new context. So by swapping out everybody each time, you don't really have that opportunity. So I would say, that's a disadvantage, unfortunately. But so I just started to kind of play a little bit more. Maybe I would pull out only 2 and let one stay. Or the other thing that I did was I would allow 3 kids to continue, and then I would ask a couple of veteran kids to add to the scene, so they would be entering the scene. So now we have 5 kids on stage, which does allow, and they're not necessarily changing the scene, they're finding characterization and context to include and blend into the scene. So like new characters in the same scene appear knocking on the door, something like that, which then allows the other actors on the stage to have that opportunity to react, to change, to shift to new circumstances kind of being played out for them. So.
Which sounded great, but I understand, Allie, that it actually brought up other problems at this point for you.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of kids on stage that have never worked together, so their dynamics are not necessarily intact, like who does what, because a lot of times you have these like archetypes that kind of come out over the course of the time that they work together. So we have a lot of kids working on stage together that have never worked together before. And it's a matter of maintaining cohesion within the scene. Really, it's that, not even so much the characters blending, but the actual kids themselves, like knowing, like, okay, this person is here, this person's there, where is this going to go? When do I kind of step back and let others take focus to propel the story? Things like that. So the problem is when you have a lot of kids that don't have that awareness yet on stage, and again, everything is a litmus, so part of this too is to sort of see how they did.
Right.
And I get to learn more about each of the kids as well. But what happens is a lot of times when you have a lot of kids, they splinter off into these different little subgroups within the scene. Now, within the little realm that they've created, maybe it's still contextual, it still aligns with what's happening, but they've developed their own story and it's going off in this direction, and other kids are over here going off in this direction. You have kids chasing each other for some reason because of something that they've created over here. Really, it ends up just being chaos on the stage.
Wow.
Yeah. So we took this as an opportunity to kind of say, okay, what happened here? How did this, why did this happen? I mean, yes, your story over there was, you knew what you were doing, but the people in your scene over here had no idea what was happening over there and couldn't react cohesively to tell the story in a way that makes sense.
Right.
So we sat down, we talked about it, we figured out, what we needed to improve upon. Maybe it's listening, maybe it's taking a step back if we know that we're stealing focus, things like that.
So in essence, you took a situation that was descending into a bit of chaos and used it productively from an educational standpoint, and helped them, I think, really maybe understand it perhaps in a way that they might not have had this not occurred.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it appears that the big challenge here is having so many kids on stage at the same time. So do you think that in the future you would approach this type of game somewhat differently to avoid that crowd, as it were?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and this game, the entire group doesn't have to be involved, like watching as the other kids are playing up. Once they know the rules of the game, I can make 2 larger groups, so basically split the groups up, and there can be 2 games of freeze happening, and then you can stick to the more traditional rules of the game. I can even give each of the 2 teams, if you will, different intentions, or different things to be working on, or different things to look for. And then again, at the end, maybe come back together and have that sort of discussion on what did you see, what did you learn. I'd be bopping around between the 2. Maybe I would make a veteran actor someone who's calling freeze. And ideally, where this game is actually headed is that I no longer call freeze. The kids, and this is a classic game, freeze is like a totally classic improv game. Ideally, where we're headed is that the students themselves are watching them and they identify a moment that you can do something with it. The kid calls out freeze and goes up. So I'm starting things off by modeling like what might be a good opportunity to call freeze, but we will be moving into a realm where they themselves are going to kind of be the masters of the game, and I can like step out and watch and give coaching and maybe provide. If things aren't moving, holler out like resolution or like let's find a conflict, just to kind of give them things to play with.
So it sounds like maybe this is somewhat typical of your process, is introducing something, giving them an opportunity to tinker with it a bit, trying again until they can start taking it over with just with a little bit of input from you as needed.
And I'm always going to push them. I mean, that's a given, as a coach or, director, whatever you want to call it. I mean, that your students can always go a little further. I mean, everybody has a ceiling, but I don't want them to necessarily, like, we're done here. Like, I want them to always be searching for something else that they can do. And then when we make other decisions about when do we stop, when we get to more of that playwriting and production process. But right now, it's like, let's extend. Let's see where we can take this. So,
well, interestingly, my mind went to thinking about the person who is in that directing or coaching position when these kinds of circumstances occur. And I always wonder, and I'm going to ask you if this happens at all to you, do you find it hard to keep from going to a place of self-blame when things don't work out in the way that you had meticulously planned? Or do you think maybe you have had enough experience to know that when you encounter a situation like that you actually call in the troops and collectively analyze what's going on and change course so maybe it doesn't throw you in that way?
Yeah.
I don't know. And is it really related to experience to keep from kind of descending into that self-blame?
I think, as an artist, it's very hard to not sort of reflect back at yourself, like, what did I do here? If things aren't successful, I'm a pretty sensitive person. I think not all artists, but many artists are. We can't help but sort of be impacted by, emotionally. We're very emotionally driven people.
Right.
So, I definitely, I don't know if I would call it like blame or guilt in a sense, and I'm bringing that word up. But there's definitely days where I'm more disappointed. Maybe this did not go well. And usually where those feelings stem from is I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I like things to kind of go the way that I see them, but I also, as much as I am that, I'm also aware that when I kind of give in to the circumstances that are around me, and like try not to like grip it so hard, then I produce my best work too, in some ways, Right. So if ever I'm feeling that the negative feelings associated with something not going well, it's usually based on an impact it may have had on the kids themselves. Did they feel left out? Did they not get to experience something that I had hoped that they would? Did they not reach a place that really I was responsible for bringing them to, in terms of didn't include something valuable that they needed to know or something like that. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to just let everything flow and trust that it's going to work out,
And it sounds like you just described it being a learning experience for you,
definitely,
as well.
Yeah,
as for anyone in a coaching or teaching position. It's really, I think, again, back to my favorite word, but a true process for everyone involved, no matter what level they're at. Yeah. So capitalizing then on the discussion Allie had with the kids regarding creating scenes, she grabbed 6 more kids and brought them to the stage and huddled with them to go over what they now started to understand are the key objectives in the scene.
And these were the kids that did not yet get to go up. So we've watched this chaos unfold, discussed the chaos that unfolded, and now we're starting again, but with some guiding, basically some guidance based on what we reflected on as groups.
Exactly. The key elements being focus on one another, keep moving the story along in a way that makes sense, and do your best to not let it fall into chaos.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many scenes end up with like a kid running around in a circle screaming. It happens, especially with the younger boys on Halloween. So,
wow.
Happens.
Well, as it turns out, interestingly, a different kind of challenge emerged with these 6 kids, in which one of the kids during the development of the scene was drawing attention to himself to such an extent that the movement and flow of the story was impeded, and the kids kind of got stuck in this repeated pattern. Allie, I wondered how did you handle this situation, which could very well be quite dicey, and is this a dynamic that you encounter fairly often?
Yeah, especially as the young actors are learning how to engage with each other and share the stage space, especially in an improv setting, because it's kind of like me, You have kids that are just like ready to go.
Right.
Those are the kids we have a lot of talks about energy and how do we control the energy, but not so much suppress it. Let's just channel it. So I bring up a lot of maybe really strong comedic actors that are like super out there. And say they must have driven their teachers crazy, but look what happened when they learned how to control and channel that energy. You know, you're seeing like comic genius happen. So I have a lot of future Jim Carreys, maybe, we'll see.
Okay.
But in terms of this particular day, this is a great example of how context really played a part. It was Halloween, as we know, and I have a feeling that the student was pretty hopped up on sugar that day.
Oh, my
Because some teachers will give out candy, like allergy conscious, but they'll give out some candies throughout the day. So like, I know this kid came in like chewing on something with like a lollipop, like all kinds. You know, he was pretty hopped up because he was actually one of my veteran actors. So I was like, "What are you doing, kid? Like, you know, what is this?" And he was like, "Halloween." I was like, "Oh, okay, here we go." So I did speak with them at the beginning of the scene, despite his scene unraveling, with the idea there's other veteran actors in that group with him, and I was like, all right, guys, like, you know what you're doing, like, let's show the younger ones like how it's done. Let's make this happen. And he was like, you got it, boss. You know, I was like, oh, okay. It was just funny. But the sugar did win. The student continued to steal the focus and delve the group just kind of into this repeated pattern with like a word he kept yelling out, and the kids were like, what do we do with this? And they were looking at me. I was like, trying to do something with it, you know, it's improv, see what you can do. But yeah, they did struggle. They struggled to work around his energy and what he was bringing. And if he had taken what he brought and channeled that into something, it could have really played out differently. But I don't know that it was something he was able to do at that time, at that moment.
Right, exactly. And then you had the rest of the kids analyze, once again, what they felt occurred, and used this as an opportunity to introduce what you call analyze, critique, and complement, a three-step process. Analyze being what you would think, you know, analyzing the scene as the kids played it out, keeping in mind the key objectives.
Yeah, maybe there's like something specific that they're looking for that day. So.
Right. Exactly. The critique part of it is all about constructive criticism, how to communicate it in a respectful way so that the other kid or kids don't shut down, but rather it becomes a tool to facilitate their growth, and in the process they really learn resilience.
Yeah, for sure.
And I would imagine they're going to need a lot of resilience if they continue on as actors in this profession.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But always, as Allie says, we end with a compliment, because there is always something good that has occurred that can be noted and brought to the surface. So the kids began their analysis, and it was a little bit heavy on the not so good things side.
It was agreed that there could be improvement.
Exactly, and then I think it, you know, from what you described, Allie, improvement seemed to be the key focus, as opposed to this was really awful, guys. But, you know, you need to improve your focus, not steal scenes, not create chaos, not repeat ideas. But they did note a couple of positive things where, you know, the kids, to a certain extent, were able to keep the scene going. They stayed with a Halloween theme, and they even brought some physical comedy into it. So those were the compliments part of the process. And at this point, Allie took time to really commend the kids for their bravery, for being, you know, thrown into a brand new situation with kids that they didn't know. So, Allie, you really noted that they really made a concerted effort to connect with their peers, even though they did not know one another well. So do you think that in the future you would be more apt to give the kids more time to bond first before attempting this kind of scene work? Or do they just need to do this kind of scene work repeatedly and essentially learn through trial and error?
It's sort of a little bit of both. If I were to just kind of let them consistently just, try and fail, we're going to be repeating a lot of the same patterns. But I'm going to be focusing on the next couple of meetings, really building that ensemble in addition to some of that scene work. Yeah, because I want to give them chances to construct scenes in those groups. Again, this is all litmus test for me in the beginning to see who works well with who, and are the older kids leading, are the younger kids are looking up to their older peers, are they, and you see, and how are they treating each other. So I still really need to kind of see those dynamics, and I just want to see what they create when they're left on their own. But at the same time, I do want to provide some specific ensemble building activities, which I have planned. I mean, I do have some things that I'm going to incorporate soon. I kind of wanted to, again, take that litmus test and see where they're at. And now we can start to build, because I do want to establish the unity. Like, it's time. We need to, now we're going. We're heading into, I guess, the 4th week or something like that. And I had not seen too many issues. A little bit, but not too many, which is good. But it's time to kind of build that connection and the identity of those kids involved, especially the new kids. So
exactly. And even when there are bumps in the road, as you were describing earlier, you once again involved the kids in analyzing the situation and problem solving, and in the case of the child who was diverting attention to himself, the fact that you really addressed it very candidly and openly by saying, there are good ideas here, there's a lot of great energy, how do we harness it to make the scene productive? And I see that you really positioned this problem in a positive way that would not shut this kid down or shame him in front of his peers.
For sure.
And it occurred to me that it also enabled the other kids to start thinking productively and maybe preemptively about how to deal with this kind of issue, which I asked you earlier, does this happen frequently? And my guess was that, it certainly can. So great to sort of have a grab bag of options that you can employ under those circumstances. And again, you took a collective approach to problem solving here, which I think really empowers the kids. And again, I think this is an example of you're tacitly communicating that even though on the surface it looks like an issue about one kid, in fact, it's a whole group issue, and constantly taking it from the single and expanding it out. So you have this kind of collective brain power.
This is going to come into play later too. We have these open conversations about individuals, and if it's a serious issue, but I take the kid aside. If it really comes to a point, I have private conversations, I handle things, appropriately in that way if necessary. But if it's something, it was not a sensitive issue. This kid he's a strong kid, I know him, he's resilient, so we can laugh about it in a context oh yeah, he was all over the place. Okay, so how do we rein it in? What do we do? But the thing is I want them to kind of be accountable for each other. One of the ways that we that I discuss on how do we do that is we talk about being respectful. How do we talk to each other to get results, which again goes back to the whole criticism, the constructive criticism. Because there's going to be times where I'm not going to be backstage with them. That's the goal. They're doing their show completely on their own. No adults backstage is the goal. So I start right away of check each other. You got to keep each other in check. If you see someone who's out there, we need to help bring them in. But we also, like you said, without shame or criticism in a way that's going to alienate or upset the kid, just reminding him of or her of their responsibility to help this team function. You know, it starts with that. So we were able to laugh with this kid, and he was like, "You're right, I was off the rocker," you know, and I was like, "Sorry, guys," you know. But again, having that conversation in the open then makes it easier to deal with later when they're the ones dealing with that conflict themselves, like by themselves. So
exactly, and it just occurred to me that you actually destigmatize the behavior.
Yeah, because it's really, a lot of the time it's just an energetic thing. You know what I mean? I mean, we're talking theater kids here. You know, they're bananas, and it's beautiful. It's great, but many of them have that in common, where they all have been in a classroom and they're like, I want to get out of my chair. You know what I mean? A lot of them experience this and can identify, you know, being too much at a time or in their life. You know, so we kind of, I address that in a way that doesn't cause shame. We just figure out how is this energy going to be useful to us? But then what do we need to do to make it so?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, Allie tossed out a question, sort of thinking, having them think a little bit in the future about what kinds of things they might like to explore in Drama Club this year. And I still laugh as Allie told me it was like hearing crickets.
I was like,
nothing, absolutely nothing. But interestingly, but maybe not surprisingly, once you offered specific examples, such as stage combat, for example, then there was a lot of enthusiasm. Oh yeah, that would be, you know, really great. So even in this segment, I imagine you really learned a great deal about their level of experience in the theater. Or lack thereof, you know, not even being able to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, clearly if they had come in with like, I want to learn this, I want to learn that, but then obviously I would say, okay, I'm thinking of starting here, we can start up here. So now I know, you know, where we're headed, and I'm going to continue to kind of, you know, ask them these questions. We had a smaller group, which is actually why I had this conversation when I had the opportunity to kind of, we were all sitting in a circle, very casual, you know, a few minutes left. We were able to just have a chat, and that was nice, and that goes along with ensemble building, of course, and just for me to get to know them, you know. I'm still learning their names. I got most of them. I have like 2 sets of twins. I'm like, oh no. Yeah, as well. But you know, those moments, those kind of conversations are important, but I did learn a lot about them at the same time through that, so.
Exactly. And I think, you know, we really saw a bit of what I call a tribal mentality emerging during this scene work, in which the kids really, and again, perhaps not surprisingly, gravitated toward those they already knew. So I wonder, Allie, how can you achieve a balance between giving the veterans opportunities to reconnect with one another and reestablish their bonds, and at the same time encouraging them to form connections with the new kids?
At this stage, I don't mind that some of the kids are sort of not excluding, but just wanting to be in their group, because I want them to reestablish the identity that they have shared, that they've created as the ensemble. I mean, I say that with a capital E, because last year they were the ensemble, you know what I mean? So I want them to maintain that identity and build upon that. And you know, rekindle that ownership feeling, you know?
Right.
But as we move forward, I'm hoping to see some of those boundaries dissolve, and I typically do. And the ways that I'm going to facilitate that is when we do get into more group work, scene work, games that might be groupings and things like that. I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to obviously mix it up a little bit. And if I'm seeing some negative behaviors really come out, like really honest, like excludes, you can't be in our group kind of stuff, that's when we have the conversation. And that probably would, depending on the context that it's occurring in, it might either be, you know, we're all going to have this chat together, or I'm going to pull this kid aside and we're going to have a very frank conversation about, you know.
Or maybe both.
Or maybe the conversation will happen privately, and then this child will go back and say, wow, guys, I wasn't. Make them kind of, you know, be accountable for it. You know?
Exactly.
It's important to cultivate that as well, being able to be like, I was totally wrong, sorry. You know, that builds
take ownership.
Yeah.
Well, finally, my last question is that you shared with me, Allie, that there's a substantial developmental gap between your 6th grade drama club students and your 8th grade drama club students, which doesn't come as a huge surprise given, in general, the differences between kids at those two ages. But they're all together in your club. So what do you think you'll do to work with that difference? Do you think part of what you just described in terms of mixing it up is involved? Is there do you really design specific mentoring opportunities, for example, where the older kids can model certain kinds of behaviors, approaches, ways of operating that the younger kids can then inculcate? You know, what do you feel would be an effective way to deal with, you know, a gap that is not of your making, but that, you know, that just kind of comes with the territory?
I mean, it's appropriate that they have these different interests and perspectives. I mean, they're at completely opposite ends. One group is just beginning and the other is getting ready to move on, especially towards the end of the year. And also, I mean, that doesn't necessarily make it any easier bridging that gap. So like you mentioned, and we mentioned, you know, throughout today's Videocast, like there'll be a lot of groupings that I can differentiate. So if I really want, and plus too, when we get to the playwriting, even the content that you see there's a vast difference. Much more mature themes and things like that the older kids might be experimenting with, where the younger kids might have, you know, cute things that they're coming up with, and then you have like these really introspective pieces that these 8th graders are coming up with. And then you see some on either end of the spectrum. You have very silly things coming out of the 8th grade too. But it is, I mean, it's appropriate. You know, their minds are different. They have an entirely different view of the world. We have 11, possibly even 10-year-olds working with kids who are going to be 14 by the end of this. So we're definitely going to take that mentoring approach with differentiation. Sometimes I might have the groups be homogenous, so younger kids are together today, older kids are together to kind of develop some of those higher end skills versus developing more of the fundamental skills, and then you can blend along the way, so you bring up those lower kids to meet the more experienced kids, and then everybody gains from that. You know what I mean? So we'll definitely be taking on that approach, and then when we do get into more of our production process, I might give specific roles to those older kids to help the flow of rehearsal be successful. Sometimes the kids, maybe like our friends with a lot of energy, give them some jobs of things that just have to get done, because then it's you're putting it on them to make it happen. And a lot of these kids too, like that energy, they want to put that energy somewhere. So you can mentor specifically, like you're going to be in charge of making sure this 6th grade scene like comes off, you know, perfectly. You're going to actually go work on their lines, go get that. You know, you're going to go block with them today. Like give them the jobs that need to get done, where they can utilize some of those new strengths that they have because they're older. You know. They usually step up to the challenge at the age they're at. Sometimes ego gets in the way, as it should. I mean, they are developing that strength of character, their personal character. So sometimes, you know, keeping them in check, like you're still a peer, you know, don't get bossy with them, things like that. But it's not so bad when they do get like that, because you're sort of seeing them break out of their shell a little bit, and usually a little reminder or two helps them to kind of rechannel that into a more effective way to communicate and to lead. And you know, they're teenagers. It's okay. Like they're supposed to push boundaries, and I can create the space for them to kind of push within safety, I guess you could say, and then I can sort of guide them back. So they have a lot to offer once they reach that stage and willing to, you know, bring themselves into the process. It's just they have to learn how to manage it.
Exactly, and it really, what you just said, I mean, you're seeing developmentally expected behaviors playing out in your context here. But how interesting that you have an opportunity to work with it, perhaps in a way that most adults really can't or don't know how to do.
Yeah. It's not always successful. They are teenagers after all. That is actually a larger, within this realm of this discussion, I do worry about my older kids more than I worry about my younger kids, because sometimes in order to explain things, or if we're all in a group together, I have to take it down versus bringing it up. The bringing up is more when we're in those smaller groups. So there are times where I'm like, oh, like, are my 8th graders like frustrated right now? Is this too babyish for them? I definitely do have those feelings if there is anxiety that's brought up regarding this issue. It's more about making sure the older kids are feeling satisfied, and that they're not feeling like they're being dragged down or treated like babies or something like that, just because I may have to address the group in a way that they feel they are older than. And so that's something. And there's not a whole lot I can do about that in certain contexts. Sometimes information has to be given in a certain way. But then, I'll try to reconnect with them on their level in various ways, like smaller group discussions about, specific ways they can take a scene or something like that I wouldn't offer the younger kids.
Well, it's interesting then. It sounds like it's a very dynamic situation that requires some adept balancing constantly as you go forward in the process. And I'm wondering if this is analogous to regular academic classrooms where you have a range of abilities. And I hear discussions about this, whether it be amongst educators or parents. How do you differentiate learning so that you don't lose those who are more advanced, nor those who may be struggling? And I wonder if in the context of the drama club, you're encountering some of what maybe are universal challenges in the educational world.
Yeah, I definitely am. I mean, I'm a special ed teacher when I'm not doing this. So, I'm lucky in that I have a lot of experience in recognizing if I'm, quote unquote, losing a kid on one end or the other. But it's very, I guess the word is organic, to figure out what works best. I mean, there's no just like, give the kid another worksheet. Like, you really want to, which, I mean, sometimes is at that moment maybe the option, and sometimes kids might perceive that as I'm getting extra work, so then you have to craft it in a way that speaks to their interests, so they're getting personal. It's organic. That's what I mean by that. Okay. So within this context of the theater program, if you're going to differentiate in that way or deal with these issues or these problems, I think crafting it personally makes a big difference.
Well, this will be so interesting to see as the club meetings progress, how a lot of these pretty major and complex issues play out over time as everyone develops, no matter where their starting point is. And we'll also, of course, look forward to the next meeting when the kids who crafted their emotion commotion scenes get to perform them. So that'll be a nice little mini milestone, perhaps. At this point.
It will be. Yeah, I'm definitely putting some weight to this. It's not just a little quickie scene that we've tossed together. I want them, they've invested in them, which is great. So
great. So, and we hope you'll stay with us to hear about how it played out and how it all fits into the greater process, as it were. So again, Allie, thank you for being with us. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you.
Have a good night.